The old grandfather clock in the dusty corner of Lillian Zimmerman's kitchen had marked the hours of the worst day of her life, ticking away with indifferent precision as her husband Thomas packed his belongings into a leather suitcase, his face void of remorse. That was 3 months ago, when he had abandoned their 15 years of marriage for Sophia Emerson, the 22-year-old daughter of the town's banker, a woman nearly 20 years Lillian's junior. Bozeman, Montana in 1885 was not kind to abandoned wives. At 38, Lillian felt the weight of her circumstances pressing down on her shoulders like the heavy winter snow that blanketed the town each December. Thomas had left her the house, their modest 2-story home on the outskirts of town, but little else. The ranch they had built together had been sold, the money divided, though not equally. Thomas had always been shrewd with business and cruel in separation. The morning air was crisp as Lillian wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and made her way toward McAllister's general store. Her boots crunched against the frost-covered ground, her breath forming small clouds in the air. The town was already awake, the blacksmith's hammer ringing out, the scent of fresh bread wafting from the bakery, horses neighing as they were hitched to wagons. "Good morning, Mrs. Zimmerman," called Mr. Peterson, the elderly postmaster, tipping his hat as she passed. Lillian smiled politely but noted the pity in his eyes. Everyone in Bozeman knew her story. Everyone had witnessed Thomas parade around town with Sophia on his arm, flaunting his new life while Lillian struggled to maintain her dignity. The bell above McAllister's door jingled as she entered. The store was warm and smelled of coffee, leather, and tobacco. A few early customers milled about, examining goods or engaging in quiet conversation. Lillian approached the counter where Martha McAllister, a plump woman with kind eyes, was tallying numbers in a ledger. "Morning, Lillian," Martha said, looking up with a smile. "What can I get for you today?" "Just some flour and sugar," Lillian replied, placing her basket on the counter. "And perhaps some coffee if the price hasn't gone up again." Martha nodded and began gathering the items. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly. Lillian straightened her spine. "Fine, thank you." The lie came easily now after months of practice. In truth, she was barely managing. The money from the ranch sale would last her perhaps another year if she was careful, but then what? She had been trying to find work, but opportunities for women in Bozeman were limited, especially for one approaching 40 with no particular skills beyond homemaking. "I heard Thomas and that girl are planning a trip to San Francisco," Martha said, unable to contain her gossip. "Apparently, he's looking to invest in some business ventures out west." The news stung, but Lillian kept her expression neutral. "I wish them well," she said, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. The bell above the door jingled again, and both women turned to look. A tall man entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. Dust covered his denim pants and cotton shirt, and his brown leather vest showed signs of hard travel. His face was partially obscured by several days' worth of beard, but his eyes were strikingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "Morning, ladies," he said, his voice deep and tinged with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from Montana. "Mr. Nash," Martha greeted him with a warm smile. "Back from the cattle drive already?" "Yes, madam," he replied, approaching the counter. "Got back late last night. Thought I'd restock my supplies before heading out to the homestead." Lillian tried not to stare, but there was something magnetic about the stranger. He stood tall and confident, but without the arrogance that many men carried. "Lillian, have you met Kade Nash?" Martha asked. "He bought the old Williams place last spring. Mr. Nash, this is Lillian Zimmerman." Kade turned to her, a smile touching his lips as he extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Zimmerman." Lillian took his hand, noting the strength in his grip and the calluses that spoke of hard work. "Mr. Nash," she acknowledged. "Mr. Nash just moved here from Texas," Martha explained. "Finest cattleman we've seen in these parts in years if the success of his first drive is anything to go by." A hint of embarrassment colored Kade's face at the praise. "Just doing what I know, Mrs. McAllister." Lillian finished her transaction, acutely aware of Kade Nash's presence beside her. As she gathered her purchases, she accidentally knocked her basket to the floor, spilling its contents. "Allow me," Kade said, immediately crouching to help collect her items. Their hands brushed as they both reached for a small tin of tea, and Lillian felt a jolt of something she hadn't experienced in years. Kade's eyes met hers, and for a moment, everything else in the store seemed to fade away. "Thank you," she said softly, breaking the spell. Kade handed her the tin, his fingers lingering perhaps a second longer than necessary. "My pleasure, Mrs. Zimmerman." As Lillian prepared to leave, the door opened once more and Thomas entered with Sophia on his arm. The young woman was laughing at something he had said, her blonde curls bouncing as she moved. She wore an expensive dress that Lillian knew she could never afford, even in her better days with Thomas. The store fell silent. Martha busied herself with rearranging items on the counter, while Kade watched the scene unfold with curious eyes. Thomas noticed Lillian and hesitated briefly before steering Sophia toward the fabric section, pointedly ignoring his former wife. Lillian felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "Lillian," Kade said, his voice loud enough to be heard throughout the store, "would you allow me to carry these packages to your home? It's on my way and they look heavy." Before she could respond, he had gathered her purchases in his strong arms and offered his elbow. Gratefully, Lillian placed her hand on his arm and allowed him to escort her out, her head held high as they passed Thomas and Sophia. Outside, Lillian released a shaky breath. "Thank you for that," she said. "You didn't have to." Kade adjusted the packages in his arms. "It was no trouble." "Besides," he added, his voice dropping lower, "that man in there, he's a fool." Lillian looked up at him in surprise, unsure how to respond to such a direct statement about her former husband. "I mean it," Kade continued as they walked. "Any man who would leave a woman like you for. Well, let's just say some men don't recognize the value of what they have until it's gone." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for months. "You don't know me, Mr. Nash," she said cautiously. "No," he agreed, "but I'd like to." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the morning sun growing stronger and burning away the frost. As they approached her house, Lillian felt a strange reluctance to end their encounter. "This is me," she said, indicating the neat white house with blue shutters. Kade followed her up the path and waited as she unlocked the door. "May I bring these inside for you?" Lillian hesitated only briefly before nodding. She wasn't in the habit of inviting strange men into her home, but something about Kade Nash felt safe, trustworthy. Her kitchen was clean but modest, with a cast-iron stove, a small wooden table with 4 chairs, and shelves lined with preserves she had put up over the summer. Kade set her purchases on the table, looking around with appreciation. "You have a lovely home, Mrs. Zimmerman." "Thank you," she replied, removing her shawl and hanging it on a peg by the door. "And please call me Lillian." His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "Lillian," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. "Then I'm Kade." She offered him coffee, which he accepted, and they sat at her kitchen table, talking as morning turned to afternoon. Kade told her about his life in Texas, about losing his parents young and being raised by his older brother, about driving cattle and saving enough money to buy his own land. Lillian shared stories of her childhood in Illinois, of coming west with her parents, of meeting Thomas when she was just 20. He wasn't always. She trailed off, unsure how to continue. People change, Kade said gently. Or perhaps they just reveal who they truly are over time. When he finally stood to leave, Lillian realized hours had passed. There was a lightness in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. "I enjoyed our conversation, Lillian," Kade said, putting his hat back on. "Perhaps I could call on you again." The question hung in the air between them, full of possibility. "I would like that," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. After Kade left, Lillian stood at the window, watching his tall figure stride down the street until he disappeared from view. For the first time since Thomas had walked out, she felt something other than despair, a small flicker of hope. Over the next few weeks, Kade became a regular visitor at Lillian's home. Sometimes he brought small gifts, fresh eggs from his chickens, a jar of honey from a neighbor's hive, wildflowers picked on his way to town. They would sit and talk for hours, or sometimes just enjoy each other's company in comfortable silence. Lillian found herself looking forward to his visits, planning her days around them, wearing her better dresses when she knew he might come by. She caught herself smiling more, humming as she worked around the house, feeling more alive than she had in years. But tongues began to wag in Bozeman. A widow or near enough to one entertaining a bachelor, and a newcomer at that. Martha McAllister tried to warn her one afternoon as Lillian shopped for ribbon. "People are talking, Lillian," Martha said in a hushed tone. "About you and Mr. Nash." Lillian felt her defenses rise. "People always talk, Martha, especially when they have empty lives of their own." Martha looked surprised at her sharp response. "I'm just concerned for your reputation, dear." "My reputation?" Lillian laughed without humor. "My husband left me for a woman barely older than a child. I think my reputation survived the worst already." When she told Kade about the conversation that evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, he frowned. "Does it bother you?" he asked. "What people say?" Lillian considered the question. "It used to," she admitted. "But now I find I care less about the opinions of others and more about my own happiness." Kade reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "And are you happy, Lillian?" She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, illuminated by the golden light of the setting sun. "Yes," she said softly. "More than I thought possible a few months ago." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Kade leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Lillian remained still, her heart pounding as his lips met hers in a gentle kiss. When they parted, Lillian's cheeks were flushed and Kade's eyes were dark with emotion. "I've wanted to do that since the first day in the store," he confessed. Lillian touched her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. "I'm glad you waited," she said. "But I'm also glad you didn't wait any longer." The following Sunday, Kade escorted Lillian to church, a public declaration of their courtship that set the town abuzz. They walked into the white clapboard building together, Lillian's arm tucked into Kade's, her head held high despite the whispers and stares. Thomas and Sophia were already seated near the front, their status as the banker's daughter and her wealthy beau affording them prime positioning. Thomas's face darkened when he saw Lillian with Kade, his eyes narrowing as they took their seats several rows behind. Throughout the service, Lillian was acutely aware of Thomas repeatedly glancing back at them. She found she didn't care. Let him look. Let him see that she had found happiness without him, that his abandonment hadn't broken her. After the service, as congregants mingled outside in the churchyard, Thomas approached them, leaving Sophia chatting with her parents. "Lillian," he said stiffly, then turned to Kade. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced." Thomas Zimmerman. Kade's expression remained neutral as he shook Thomas's hand. Kade Nash. Mr. Nash is new to Bozeman, Lillian explained, though she knew Thomas was well aware of this fact. Yes, I've heard, Thomas said, a note of condescension in his voice. You purchased the Williams place, I believe, ambitious for a cattle rancher. I've always believed in aiming high, Kade replied evenly. The Williams Ranch has good water rights and excellent grazing land. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. Indeed, though I must warn you, Montana winters can be brutal for those not accustomed to them. I appreciate the concern, Kade said, but I've weathered my share of storms. The double meaning wasn't lost on Thomas, whose jaw tightened. Well, I should rejoin my fiancé. Good day to you both. As Thomas walked away, Lillian released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I'm sorry about that. Kade shook his head. Don't be. I meant what I said that first day, Lillian. He's a fool. And seeing you today, I'm even more convinced of it. That evening, as they sat in Lillian's parlor, Kade shared his plans for expanding his cattle operation, speaking with enthusiasm about breeding better stock and improving the grazing rotation on his land. I've been thinking, he said, suddenly shifting topics, about asking for help with the homestead. Lillian looked at him quizzically. What kind of help? The house is large, too large for just one person. And while I can manage the cattle well enough, I've never been much of a cook or housekeeper. He paused, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, is that I could use a woman's touch. Your touch, specifically. Lillian's heart began to race. Kade, are you? He took her hands in his. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon by conventional standards, but I'm 40 years old, Lillian. I've waited a long time to find someone I could imagine sharing my life with, and now that I've found you, I don't want to waste any more time. Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. What exactly are you asking me? Marry me, he said simply. Come live with me on the ranch. Let's build something together, a home, a life, a future. The proposal hung in the air between them, unexpected yet somehow not surprising. Lillian thought of the lonely months after Thomas left, the emptiness of the house, the uncertainty of her future. Then she thought of Kade, his kindness, his strength, the way he looked at her as if she were precious. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly. Yes, I will marry you. Kade's face broke into a radiant smile, and he pulled her into a passionate kiss that left them both breathless. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers, his blue eyes filled with joy. You've made me the happiest man in Montana, he said. The news of their engagement spread through Bozeman like wildfire. Most reactions were positive. Lillian was well liked, and Kade had made a good impression during his time in town, but some, particularly Thomas's friends, were less supportive. Don't you think you're rushing into this? Martha asked when Lillian came to order fabric for a wedding dress. You've only known him a few months. I knew Thomas for years, Lillian countered, and look how that turned out. Time doesn't guarantee anything, Martha. It's the quality of the person that matters, not how long you've known them. Martha couldn't argue with that logic, and soon she was enthusiastically helping Lillian select a beautiful blue fabric that complemented her eyes. The wedding was set for October, before the harsh winter weather would make travel difficult. Kade's brother Gabriel would be coming from Texas, along with a few old friends. Lillian invited her cousin Alina from Helena and several friends from town. As the wedding approached, Lillian began packing up her belongings, preparing to sell the house that held so many memories, both good and painful. Kade helped her in the evenings, carefully wrapping her china, disassembling furniture, sorting through years of accumulated possessions. Are you sad to be leaving? He asked one night as they sat surrounded by crates and boxes. Lillian considered the question. Parts of it are sad, she admitted. "This was my home for 15 years. But mostly, I'm looking forward to creating new memories with you." Kade pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Our home will be filled with happiness, Lillian. I promise you that." 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. A fire broke out at Kade's ranch house, started by a lightning strike during an early autumn storm. By the time neighbors noticed the blaze and rode out to help, the main structure was engulfed in flames. Kade arrived at Lillian's door at dawn, his clothes smelling of smoke, his face streaked with soot. "The house is gone," he said, his voice hollow with shock. "Everything except the barn and corrals." Lillian pulled him inside, sat him at the kitchen table, and poured him a cup of strong coffee laced with whiskey. "Was anyone hurt?" she asked, her practical nature taking over. He shook his head. "No, thank God. I was in town at the hotel and there were no hands staying at the house. But Lillian, all my savings were in that house, everything I had put aside for our future." The implication hung heavy in the air. Without the house or his savings, their plans were in jeopardy. "We'll rebuild," Lillian said firmly, taking his hands in hers. "Together." Kade looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of love and sorrow. "It could take months, maybe longer." The wedding will proceed as planned," she interrupted. "Unless you've changed your mind about wanting to marry me." "Never," he said fiercely. "But where will we live? What will we live on?" Lillian gestured around them. "We have this house. I haven't sold it yet. We can stay here while we rebuild the ranch house." Kade shook his head. "I can't ask you to support us, Lillian. That's my responsibility." "Is it?" she challenged. "I thought marriage was a partnership. My money, your money, our money. My house, your ranch, our home." For a moment Kade was silent, then a slow smile spread across his tired face. "You are an extraordinary woman, Lillian Zimmerman." "Soon to be Lillian Nash," she corrected him. "And don't you forget it." Word of the fire spread quickly through Bozeman. By noon, neighbors were arriving at Lillian's door with food, blankets, and offers of help. By evening, a group of men had organized a barn raising for the following weekend, to build a temporary shelter for Kade's cattle during the coming winter. Thomas came by the next day, standing awkwardly on Lillian's porch. "I heard about the fire," he said. "I'm sorry for Nash's loss." Lillian regarded her ex-husband coolly. "Thank you for your concern, Thomas." He shifted uncomfortably. I wanted to offer assistance, financial assistance, a loan to help with the rebuilding." Lillian was momentarily speechless. "Why would you do that?" Thomas looked away. "Despite everything, I did care for you once, Lillian. And I feel responsible in a way for your current situation." "My current situation," Lillian repeated. "You mean being engaged to a man who loves and respects me, a man who saw value in me when you discarded me like last season's boots?" Thomas flinched. "I deserved that, but the offer stands. No interest, repayable when Nash gets back on his feet." Lillian considered it briefly. The money would certainly help, but accepting it felt wrong somehow. "I appreciate the gesture, Thomas, but we'll manage on our own." He nodded, looking both relieved and disappointed. "The offer remains open should you change your mind." As he turned to leave, Lillian called after him. "Thomas, why did you really come here?" He stopped but didn't turn around. "Perhaps to ease my conscience," he admitted. "Or perhaps to see if you were truly happy." Finally, he glanced back at her. "Are you happy, I mean?" Lillian didn't hesitate. "Yes, happier than I've been in years." Thomas nodded once more and walked away. Lillian watched him go, feeling a strange sense of closure. The man who had once been the center of her world was now just a figure walking down her street, growing smaller with each step. When she told Kade about Thomas's visit later that evening, he was initially angry, then thoughtful. "He still cares for you," he observed. "Perhaps," Lillian agreed. "But it's too late for that to matter." The day of the barn raising dawned clear and cool, with the scent of autumn in the air. Nearly 30 men from Bozeman and surrounding farms gathered at Kade's ranch, armed with tools and determination. Women, including Lillian, arrived with baskets of food to feed the workers. The atmosphere was festive despite the somber reason for the gathering. Men called to each other as they positioned beams and hammered nails, while women set up long tables under the trees, laying out pies, cakes, roasted meats, and vegetables. Lillian found herself working alongside Sophia, of all people, who had arrived with a group from her father's bank. The younger woman seemed nervous, avoiding Lillian's eyes as they arranged plates on the tables. "I want to apologize," Sophia said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Lillian paused, surprised. "I wasn't aware you had anything to apologize for." Sophia looked up, her young face troubled. "I didn't know Thomas was married when we first met. By the time I found out, well, I thought I was in love. And now," Lillian couldn't help asking. The girl's shoulders sagged slightly. "Now I realize there's a difference between love and infatuation. Between a man who values you and one who collects you." The insight was surprisingly mature from someone so young. Lillian felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for Sophia. "He left me for you," she said gently. "What makes you think he won't leave you for someone else?" Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "He already has. A woman from San Francisco. She's 20. I'm getting too old, apparently." Lillian was momentarily stunned. Then, without thinking, she reached out and squeezed Sophia's hand. "I'm sorry." Sophia gave a watery laugh. "You're sorry?" "After what I did." "After what Thomas did," Lillian corrected her. "We were both deceived, just in different ways." They worked in silence for a while, a new understanding between them. By mid-afternoon, the framework of a sturdy barn stood where there had been only charred earth that morning. Men stood back to admire their work, sweaty and tired but proud. Kade found Lillian as she was serving coffee to some of the workers. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close despite the audience. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" he asked. Lillian smiled up at him. "Not in the last hour or so." "A terrible oversight on my part," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I love you, Lillian Zimmerman, soon to be Nash." The wedding took place as planned in the town's small church, with wildflowers decorating the altar and sunlight streaming through the windows. Lillian wore a dress of cornflower blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, and Kade looked handsome in a new black suit. As they exchanged vows, Lillian was struck by how different this felt from her wedding to Thomas all those years ago. She had been young then, nervous and full of romantic notions. Now she stood before God and their community as a woman who had experienced both heartbreak and healing, who knew what she wanted and had found it in the man holding her hands. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Kade pulled her close, his kiss tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The small church erupted in cheers and applause. The reception was held in the town hall, decorated with autumn leaves and candles. People danced and ate and congratulated the newlyweds. Even Thomas came, alone and subdued, offering a brief handshake to Kade and awkward good wishes to Lillian before departing early. Later that night, in the privacy of what was now their home, Kade held Lillian close as they swayed to imaginary music in the parlor. "Mrs. Nash," he murmured against her hair. "How does it feel?" "Wonderful," she replied honestly. "Like coming home after a long journey." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "I promise you, Lillian, I will never make you regret choosing me. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your love." "You already are," she said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. And I plan to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Winter came early that year, with heavy snow blanketing Bozeman by November. Kade and Lillian worked side by side, managing the cattle, planning for the new house they would build in spring, creating a life together. They converted Lillian's sewing room into an office for Kade, rearranged furniture to accommodate his books and personal items salvaged from the fire, blending their lives in practical ways. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking, reading, sometimes just enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Kade taught Lillian about cattle breeding and ranch management while she introduced him to her love of literature and gardening. By February, Lillian had news to share. "Kade," she said one evening as they prepared for bed, "I've been to see Dr. Masterson today." Concern immediately creased his brow. "Are you unwell?" she smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Not unwell, just expecting." Kade's eyes widened, then filled with tears of joy. "A baby, our baby," Lillian nodded, laughing as he picked her up and spun her around the room. "Careful," she admonished. "Precious cargo, remember," he set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "You are the most precious thing in my world, Lillian Nash. You and now our child. I never thought I could be this happy." As spring returned to Montana, bringing with it new life and possibilities, construction began on their new ranch house. Kade insisted on incorporating elements that Lillian loved: large windows to let in light, a spacious kitchen, a covered porch where they could watch the sunset. They moved into the completed house in August, just a month before their son was born. They named him James Gabriel Nash after both their fathers, and he had Kade's blue eyes and Lillian's dark hair. Thomas left Bozeman that same month, heading to San Francisco permanently. Before he left, he stopped by the ranch, awkwardly holding a carved wooden rocking horse. "A gift for the baby," he explained. Lillian accepted it with grace. "Thank you, Thomas." He nodded, looking around at the new house, at the visible signs of Lillian's happiness: the flowers she'd planted, the curtains she'd sewn, the cradle Kade had built for their child. "You were right," he said finally. "About what you told Sophia, I wasn't capable of valuing what I had. And now," Lillian asked. Thomas shrugged. "Now I'm starting over, again." He hesitated, then added, "I'm glad you found someone who sees your worth, Lillian. You deserve that." After he left, Lillian found Kade in the nursery, putting the finishing touches on the crib. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her head against his strong back. "Everything all right?" he asked, turning to embrace her properly. "Everything is perfect," she said, and meant it. 5 years passed, bringing with them another child, a daughter named Elizabeth, and the expansion of their ranch into one of the most successful in the territory. Lillian started a small school for the children of nearby ranchers, using her parlor as a classroom 3 days a week. Kade's cattle business thrived under his careful management. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Kade surprised Lillian with a picnic by the creek that ran through their property. The October air was crisp, the aspens glowing gold in the sunlight. Their children played nearby, James teaching Elizabeth how to skip stones across the water. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Nash," Kade said, handing her a small box wrapped in blue ribbon. Inside was a delicate gold locket. When she opened it, she found a miniature photograph of their family on one side and an inscription on the other. "To my beloved Lillian, who makes every day a blessing." Tears filled her eyes as Kade fastened it around her neck. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Not as beautiful as you," he replied, the love in his eyes as strong as it had been on the day they met. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if Thomas hadn't left you?" Lillian considered the question, watching her children laugh in the sunshine. Sometimes, she admitted. But then I remember something a very wise cowboy once told me. What's that? Kade asked, a smile playing at his lips. Lillian leaned forward to kiss him softly. That he was a fool. And that sometimes a person needs to lose something precious to make room for something even more valuable to come into their life. Kade pulled her close, his arms strong and secure around her. I thank God every day that I found you, Lillian Nash. And I thank God that you were brave enough to tell me the truth that day, she replied. That you saw value in me when I had forgotten it was there. As the sun began to set over the Montana mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Lillian Nash knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be in this place, at this time, with this man who had helped her rebuild not just a home, but a life filled with love, purpose, and joy.